We are ready, Chair Sablon.
Good evening and welcome to the June 15th, 2023 meeting of the West Sacramento Planning Commission. Tonight's agenda is available on the counter along with request to speak cards. A reminder to everyone that request to speak cards should be completed and turned into the clerk prior to the completion of any staff presentation. For those speakers wishing to speak on items not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of this commission, please write item 1 on your card. All speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and televised, so all speakers, in order to be recognized, must be called on by the chair and come forward to the microphone. Speaking in public may cause some individuals to be uncomfortable, so everyone is asked to be professional and respectful at all. Okay, and with that, we'll open with the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Tilley, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, republic which stands one nation, God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
And first item we have up is presentation by the public on matters not on the agenda within the jurisdiction of the commission. Do we have anything for item 1?
We don't have any requests to speak.
Okay, thank you. Any correspondence and staff communications from Mr. Tilley?
Yes, 2 quick items. You should have before you tonight a hard copy and earlier in your email some requested edits to the minutes from our last meeting. And we would ask that if those are satisfactory, that be included in a motion when we get to that item. And then also tonight, nice treat, our hot off the presses brand new assistant planner, JT Lee, is here with us tonight. And I asked him to be here tonight to see how our commission works, hopefully to meet all of you, and noting that before too long, he'll be probably presenting something before the commission. So he's been with us about 4 weeks now and is already making a lot of contributions. So I wanted to hope the Planning Commission can welcome him to our little planning family here.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. Welcome, Mr. Lee. Disclosure of any ex parte communications from the commissioners? Yep. We have our consent agenda. Item 4, consideration and approval of the minutes from May 4th, 2023. Any motion?
I'll make the motion to approve the revised May 4, 2023 meeting minutes.
Thank you. Second from Commissioner Squires. We have a motion by Commissioner Olivares and a second by Commissioner Squires.
Commissioner Squires? Commissioner Linker?
Aye.
Commissioner Olivares?
Aye.
Commissioner Wong?
Aye.
Commissioner Delgado?
Aye.
Vice Chair Jackson?
Aye.
Chair Sablon?
Aye. Thank you. And with that, the minutes are approved. Turning to item 5 on our regular agenda, presentation and discussion of updates to the city's general plan, mobility element, and related updates to the Bridge District specific plan.
Good evening, Chair Sablon, members of the Commission. This item before you tonight is a workshop, so we're here to receive feedback, and then we'll be returning to the Commission probably in September for a public hearing. So let's start out. So for the agenda for tonight, I'm going to give some background on what a general plan is and what is the Bridge District specific plan. And then we'll get into updates to the circulation diagram and the policy changes that are proposed, as well as the proposed cross-section to Drever Street in the Bridge District. And then we'll wrap it up for discussion and questions. So for some context, a general plan is comprehensive and long-term. All cities and counties are required to have one in the state of California. It applies citywide and it's long range. So our current general plan goes to 2035. And it reflects the community's values and vision for how to grow. It's composed of a series of elements So tonight, we're here to discuss the mobility element, but there are also other elements. And our general plan was last comprehensively updated in 2016. So you can see by this diagram that everything the city does flows down from the general plan. Whether it's a specific plan or a zoning code, other sections in the city's municipal code, ordinances, everything needs to be consistent with the general plan. And the general plan is long-term, general, broad policy statements. When we get into more specifics, that is typically in more in city code, like the zoning code or specific plans. So the mobility element contains goals, policies, and implementation programs related to the city's circulation and transportation network, policies related to multimodal transportation, complete streets, vehicle miles traveled, otherwise known as VMT, public transit, bicycling, walking, parking, and goods movement, anything that revolves around people moving in the city of West Sacramento. There's a direct relationship between the mobility element and other elements, such as the land use element, safety element, noise, air quality, other topic areas such as that. How people move impacts air quality, people's safety. If people are driving really, really quickly, that's not as safe for walking and biking. And also it supports our land use patterns. If you want to have very dense urban development like we have in the Bridge District, you need the appropriate mobility and circulation for that. So some background on the Bridge District. This is the area around Sutter Health Park and the barn. It is south of now Cabaldon Parkway, formerly Tower Bridge Gateway, and it is in north of the bridge. So it's all zoned riverfront or waterfront, which is a riverfront mixed-use general plan land use. Very high density mixed-use development is planned in the Bridge District. The Bridge District specific plan contains design guidelines as well as a backbone circulation diagram for streets as well as cycling. And all the roads in the Bridge District have a hierarchy. So the highest order road is Riverfront Street, and that's really meant to be the most active, where you have all your retail, very active road, lots of activity. And then there's descending order to your lowest order street, which is essentially an alley, where all the back of house would be, refuse collection, parking garages going in and out. So that's the background on the Bridge District specific plan. So the main reason we are updating the mobility element is to incorporate updates to the circulation diagram that have already been approved by City Council. So other plans that have been approved by City Council include new roads that we need to get into the general plan. So this includes the Pioneer Bluff and Stonelock Reuse Master Plan. We need to get the Broadway Bridge in there. We need to get the I Street Bridge Replacement Project, which is the C Street Bridge. We need to include that in the circulation diagram, as well as the recommendations coming out of the Washington Realized Sustainable Community Strategy. So that's really the impetus for opening up the mobility element, is we need to get plans that have already been approved by City Council into the general plan. Now, that's a little backwards. You're supposed to update the general plan first. So this is a bit of housekeeping on our part to get them to be consistent. And then while we have it open, we're looking at any kind of other minor updates we can get to the policy language, and also updates to the functional classification system. So that's major arterial, minor arterial, local road collectors. So there are a few roads in the city that were designated major arterials, which really don't function as a major arterial, nor do we foresee them functioning as a major arterial. This includes Linden, Lake Washington. So this would be cleaning up those road functional classifications, because the definition of what a major arterial is includes a lot more lanes, higher speeds. So this would include downgrading those. And also it includes cleaning up some of the other local roads that are no longer existing, such as South River Road. Due to the Southport Levee Improvement Project, that road is now part of the river. It was degraded, so that's no longer shown on the updated map. And there are various other housekeeping, cleaning up the circulation diagram to reflect existing conditions or what we foresee going forward. Also includes some new development, such as up in the rivers and some of the new development over in the Newport Estates. So getting into the policy language changes, I'm going to hit on the highlights. There's a lot. I'm sure you saw the proposed edits. There's quite a lot to get in there. So I really wanted to touch on the highlights. One of them is Vision Zero. There's a new, one of the policies have been updated so that to say striving for no traffic fatalities by 2040. It's a lofty goal, but we want to get it in there. Another one is vehicle miles traveled. This is somewhat new, not so much anymore, but the old metric was LOS, level of service. So now we have vehicle miles traveled, and including some new implementation programs on that and updating the language to reflect vehicle miles traveled. One of the implementation programs is how do you reduce vehicle miles traveled in some of our more suburban developments. This graphic up here shows the percent of regional average that the VMT. So you can see a lot lower VMT. People don't have as much vehicle miles traveled in the northern area compared to Southport, which going into Southport, you have a much higher VMT. It's above the regional average. And this is important because when we have a new project, one of the thresholds in the California Environmental Quality Act is that you need to have your VMT be 15% below the regional average. Otherwise, it's significant impact. So when we have a lot of large projects in Southport, how do we get those projects to be at 15% or below, or 15% below the regional average? So this implementation program has a few reduction programs that could be applied to projects. And there's some other implementation programs in there as well, and various minor edits. And then also, because we're one of the Pioneer Bluff Reuse Master Plan included a whole road network in the Pioneer Bluff district. That's that area. It's north of the Barge Canal, south of the bridge, where the Shell station is there, along South River Road, east Jefferson. But there's a whole circulation network in there that we're including in this, but that also includes extensions of roadways up into the Bridge District. So one of them, it would be cleaning up Drever Street, have Drever Street connecting into Cabaldon Parkway. So what we're looking for feedback from you tonight is the cross-section for that Drever Street extension. This would be extending Drever Street north into Tower Bridge Gateway, or formerly Tower Bridge Gateway, now Cabaldon Parkway. So this is also provided as an attachment in the agenda report. This is the proposed cross-section. So looking for feedback on that. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and looking forward to discussion. And we also have our consultant working on this, Matthew Gerken. He's available, so if any very technical questions come up, he can help address those. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leff. And sorry, can you repeat the consultant's name?
Oh, Matthew Gerken with
Gerken.
ACOM.
Can you spell his last name?
Gerken.
Thank you. I will open it up for questions from the commissioners. I'll start to my right with Commissioner Delgado. Any questions?
Yeah, I guess we'll start with the Drever Street cross-section. Do you have a map or anything of where this is located? I wasn't able to find it myself when I was preparing for the meeting.
So if you pull up the proposed circulation diagram,
Tanya, can you back up a couple of slides? There you go.
It is, so Drever Street will be extended north past Ballpark Drive. Essentially, what we're looking at is what would be the cross-section for Drever Street between Ballpark and Cabalden Parkway.
So currently, it's, there's that Mexican restaurant right on the corner on Jefferson. Right, that's Drever.
Yeah, it is.
So so instead of going through, so if you're going on Drever, you'd end up in Ironworks, right? So this is cutting out from so it'll directly connect.
Yeah, so currently Drever Street bends right, and that turns into Ballpark Drive. So really what would happen is instead of turning right, it would also go off to the left and connect to Cabalden Parkway.
So it'll come in west of
Or
Ironworks.
west of Ironworks, yeah.
All right, because I had some questions regarding the 80-foot right-of-way, right? We've got 16 feet of pedestrian walkway on either side. However, we've only got basically the minimum, which is 5 feet of bike lane traveling in each direction. Considering that as it widens out, we're looking at much wider bike lanes, is there a reason why you chose to devote so much space to walking and landscaping and reducing the bike lane to only 5 feet at that section of the road?
So we wanted to maintain the existing right-of-way which is 80 feet for Drever south of this location. So then it's a matter of what can you fit in that existing right-of-way between Ballpark Drive and Jefferson Boulevard.
Tanya, will you put up the Drever cross-section again, please?
So there's two 11-foot travel lanes, and then the 5-foot bike lane and the 8 feet for parking. So if the commission,
So my suggestion, or what I'd be interested in, having read through the rest of the mobility element, is one thing that was brought up to reduce, I believe it's called VMT, right? Was reducing parking or, incentivizing places to decrease the amount of parking to kind of decentivize driving in specific areas. So if we wanted to incentivize biking, it would seem important to kind of make sure that we're giving cyclists as much space as we can. So if we're doing 8 feet along the rest of the road, it would kind of make sense to keep that with the bike lane throughout there. So potentially removing some parking, since that's something that's in the city's goal already. Sorry, I do apologize. I'm not super familiar with that area, so I don't know what's currently there or what kind of parking needs in that location. But it would seem that if we're going to help to reduce the amount of vehicle miles traveled and increase biking, walking, we'd want to make sure that we're giving cyclists as much space as possible to reduce any sorts of cycling and vehicle interactions. So that would be my suggestion.
I guess we'll take up the Drever Street first and then turn to the other issues. So does anyone have any comments on Drever Street?
Yeah, I just want to just to piggyback on what Commissioner Delgado was saying is that, or even possibly even considering flip-flopping the parking and bike lanes similar to what's how it is on, I guess, on the more southern end of Linden Road, where the parking is pushed out for this towards the driving, and this where the bike lanes are on the other side of the park.
I have a question on that. I've heard mixed reviews on that, on safety of drivers can't see bikers if they're behind the parking. And so when they come out, so if you're riding in a bike lane with a parking buffer and you come through, and if a driver's turning right, there's an increased safety risk. Can you speak to that, or is
We would have to loop in our transportation planning division and get their input on that. So we can definitely look into that.
Yeah, and I definitely think, the Linden Loop Road Diet project was something that was, something to accomplish with striping in an existing area that, it may not have been put in, perhaps the most perfect way you would want to do it if you were starting from scratch. But I think your comments on both of these are well taken. We do have some flexibility, and that's why we're here, to hear that type of feedback on this stuff, because those things do matter in terms of when we set these things into the general plan. It will be what people will need to follow in the future. So these are the definitely on-point comments tonight that we will take into consideration before we return to you.
Commissioner Squires, did you have something?
Yes, I just wanted to say regarding the parking on Drever. It's been my experience that when people don't find parking, they look for alternative ways to travel. And if we're wanting to lower VMTs, why do we want to give more parking? That's just a general sense I have. And I wonder if it doesn't apply to this situation, that we shouldn't have the parking there, give more room for bikes. Because I know that, like, if I'm going to downtown Sacramento or to San Francisco and I go, oh my gosh, there's nowhere to park, and I want to take public transit.
Yeah, and I think Commissioner Squires is on comment similar to what Commissioner Delgado said, and Commissioner Jackson. On the other two areas, on the two above, is there any way to, sorry, on the second one, to widen the 6 foot to 8 feet? Like, what can we reduce there to have a wider bike lane on the going north toward Cabalden Parkway?
Yeah, we can definitely look into how to widen the bike lane for that stretch, and really all the stretches. It looks like we have 11-foot travel lane on the bottom one and 11.5 foot on the middle one. So there'd be a way to half a foot for all the travel lanes.
And then on that one, is there so if the biker person wants to turn right, is there going to be a bike lane on the right of that, on the right turning lane?
Sorry, I think from just a traffic, normal traffic function, they would be able to turn, then you end up with cross traffic on the other side of the
Yeah.
turnout.
So yeah, so if you're coming down Capitol, coming to West Sac, when they have where the bike lanes split off by a right turning lane, there's also a bike lane that turns right on the right of the right turning lane.
Sorry, I apologize. So cyclists would have the full right to the right turn lane. So they would be able to take over that lane. They would have the right of way in that lane until they finish their turn, get back in the bike lane, and then people would be turning behind them.
I guess, but sometimes drivers aren't cognizant of that or respectful of that, I think. So I don't know. It looks like there may not be room for that. But I totally hear what you're saying. But if this is open, I don't know if an option.
I just had a question. Is it possible to help us understand how we got to the decision that was made in the general plan, just so I can understand what got us here before recommending changes as to where we're going? Just as plainly written in Goal 5, to develop and maintain a safe, comprehensive, and integrated bicycle system and bicycle support facilities throughout the city. I imagine some conversations occurred to support the layout, so it might be helpful for this planning commission to better understand what helped us to get to where we're at today, to better effectuate those changes as we move forward. Thank you.
So our supervising transportation planner, Jason McCoy, he came up with these cross sections. There were a few different considerations. One of them is the light rail you see there. The other is existing right of way. And the other is how do we incentivize development on that vacant, 8-acre vacant property to the west of what this Drever Street be extending up to. So probably, looking at that property on right next to the freeway, that 8-acre site that's vacant right now, Might get some sort of commercial or mixed use. Some on-street parking may support that. But you also want to have, biking and ped, light rail. Those were the considerations that were put into coming up with the cross-section before you.
And based on the dimensions that were factored out for the bike lanes, are those in accordance with any regulatory requirements to establish those bike lanes in that specific section with those set parameters? I know we're talking about lessening and or widening, but does that still fall in alignment with what the requirements and or law entail?
That is something that we can look into.
That might be helpful just for compliance purposes, and as we kind of gather, fact find and gather more information to be better informed, may lead to a more informed decision.
Any further comments on Drever Street? Seeing none, so it's from the commissioners. It's looking into widening the bike lanes if they can be, and looking into whether just the safety implications of having the parking buffer between the bike lane and traffic. Yeah. Oh, and compliance issues. And then turning to the other amendments in the mobility element, any questions or comments from the commissioners?
Yeah. I had a question regarding, sorry, if you would bring up the comparison in vehicle miles traveled. Yes. So is there, so sorry, the first image is what it is now, right? And the second image is what the goal is in 2040, is that correct? Okay. Have any studies been done about why the VMT in Southport is so much higher than in the north?
Well, I can speak broadly to that, and then I'll turn to our consultant to address that as well. But it's more suburban style development. There's less amenities down there. It's generally harder to walk and bike compared to if you were up in the north area. And there's just less mass transit. So it's just more of a suburban development pattern, land use pattern.
Okay. And to follow up on that, so aside from being suburban, because I'm familiar with that area of town, have any studies been done asking citizens specifically why they're needing to travel so much farther? Or are we done that?
We have done some surveys like that, or origin destination surveys. Do you live in West Sacramento, work in West Sacramento, or work in West Sacramento but live somewhere else? So we have gathered some empirical data, but there's a lot of factors that go into VMT. Some of it is just merely the proximity to job centers. The north area is clearly closer to downtown Sacramento, which is the primary job center in the region. There's less employment in Southport than in proximity, especially employment that aligns with some of the housing prices that drives VMT. And Seamus made a lot of good point. There's a lot more robust transit service in the north area than there is in the south area. So the south area is definitely less dense than in the north area. You can go into vehicle ownership rates. There's a lot of factors that go into VMT, but of everything we're working on tonight, this is probably one of the most important things, globally, because when we're talking about VMT, what we're really talking about is emissions, or criteria pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions. So this is one of our biggest challenges, is how we will be able to grow in the way that we are slated to grow, especially from a regional perspective, but do it in a way where we aren't going backwards on some of our climate change objectives. So we don't have all the answers to that yet, but we are working on that more citywide because no one project can solve that issue by itself. So this is one of our most important things that we have to work on, enable to allow us to continue to grow the way we are slated to grow under almost all, regional levels as well as our own general plan.
So with that being said, I've noticed that a lot of the projects that have been approved in the past few meetings and things, there's been some discussion or some, the maps suggest some mixed use zoning down there. But a lot of it still seems to be, suburban type development. So are we thinking about any sort of changes to zoning that would encourage more mixed use development down there or more retail spaces? I've noticed when I compared the two, the north and the south, there are, quite a few supermarkets along Capitol Avenue that people can get to relatively easily. But in the south, we're pretty much looking at Nugget. So, the type of things where we're putting not necessarily shopping centers, but, mixed use retail and housing where people can easily walk down the street or cycle down the street to get what they're needing. Because what I'm seeing in these projects, in these maps that are being proposed, it's still just a lot of, single family houses.
Yeah, I'll take that one, Seamus. We did move more and more in that direction with the general plan update in 2016. A lot more mixed-use opportunities, some higher densities citywide, but especially in Southport. And we will be working on that additionally on the Port Seaway property, which is one of the largest yet to be developed properties in Southport. So we will probably go even further over there on that. But some of the things you're describing also really come down to market. And every portion, each of the 4 villages in Southport has its own little, sort of neighborhood level commercial center, property zone for that. But very little of that is actually materialized, in the real world. So, and also, when all that stuff was laid out, nobody anticipated getting something like a Target or a Lowe's in the Southport area, because those things are often a lot more freeway oriented. And yet we have a couple of big boxes in Southport that are certainly pulling people from not just immediate, surrounding neighborhoods. So that's sort of what some of the market realities are, don't always align with what we might want to see happen in this regard. But the market realities in the end are what drive what happens probably about as much as any other factor. We can zone things any way we want, but it doesn't mean we're going to get what we want unless the market is there and we do our part to at least try to advance the market to where somebody can be able to make that type of investment to bring about one of those things. So that's the real world colliding with our policy level that we always struggle with.
So what you're saying is that it's going to be hard to do anything about VMTs in the southern part?
I think certainly short term.
Yeah.
If we're able to ultimately realize the decades-old goal of bringing light rail at least all the way down to the town center, that may change things. Another big question that's out there is about remote working, and will that remain prevalent? Mm-hmm. Or will that start to ebb and put more people back out on the road? I think a lot of us may have forgotten about prior to COVID when that was not as especially common, and now it's very common, and it still remains to be seen if that will stick. That drives some things, but in reality, I think some of the what we missed out on in Southport, and it's just a market reality, is what kind of employment could happen in Southport. Southport Business Park was idealized to have a lot more campus and office and R&D type development in there, and market-wise, that just hadn't panned out. So you are seeing, a lot of the distribution centers and warehouses over there that have a fairly low employment density. And the wages for some of those positions are not stellar. And also, I don't think anybody probably had visualized, $500,000 to $1 million homes in Southport also. So we have a bit of a disconnect there, and that's become a market reality. So that's why I think for us, we really want to bank on Seaway and get Seaway right and hope the market can come with us, because that we have a good opportunity there to get some mix of uses, but hopefully some fairly robust employment in the Seaway area. And that's the area just, along Southport Parkway, just west of where Lowe's is, if you're not familiar with what we mean by Seaway. Because if there's not employment down there, then people, to the extent they're not working from home, are likely going to need to get in a car and go to wherever their employment is. And that's probably one of the biggest drivers of VMT is needing to get from home to work. So we want to really be careful on Seaway and set that up and do what we can to bring the market there to yield some better outcomes than what we've seen so far.
It seems to me like bringing the light rail down into Southport is a huge, high priority to get people out of cars and decrease the VMT. And I'm wondering, I noticed, I can't find exactly in this packet, but maybe someone who knows can find it. I noticed that the priority wasn't in for this year, but for light rail, bringing the light rail in, the priority is put out 3 to 5 years or 7 years, I don't know. And I'm just curious why it wouldn't be an immediate priority for West Sacramento to bring that light rail down into Southport and get people out of their cars.
Well, because unfortunately it's not entirely up to us. We have been trying to bring some type of fixed rail transit into West Sacramento, working in earnest on it since at least 2007. That's what I can remember when I first started working on it. But light rail coming into West Sacramento and Yolo County has been an idea since the early 90s, perhaps even before, because it was in some of our original planning documents from that time period. So it is something we are actively working on, and it's a big lift. And there's a lot of parties at the table that would need to effectuate bringing that rail back over the Tower Bridge like it used to be. And then that's got to be step one. Once we get it into West Sacramento, then we can largely take it from there. But we need to get it over the Tower Bridge and into West Sacramento first. And that has proven to be a much bigger challenge than probably anybody anticipated, not just dollars and cents wise, which is a big part of it. But there are some forces out there that aren't too jazzed about having light rail come to West Sacramento from a competitiveness standpoint. Mm-hmm. Even though regionally, it would be, at least in our estimation, one of the best things we can do is to connect into the regional transit system and give our residents more ability to get around, especially into the downtown where the primary job center is.
So you feel that West Sacramento, the city, we are doing everything we possibly can as fast as we can to bring the light rail in?
We have been all in on that for years. Some of our Bridge District property owners elected to help tax themselves to help fund that. The voters passed Measure V, as just on 2018 or 16, I forget what it was now. That was to help fund not only flood protection, but also rail coming here. So from my perspective, West Sacramento is all in on this and has been all in on it for a number of years. It just shows that many of these things are going to be federally funded. So there's that level of complication. But we need to continue to work with our partners at RT, Sacramento, SMUD, YOLOBUS, PG&E, all of those parties, and Caltrans for that matter too, all of those parties need to be in alignment for this to happen. And that's still, I think, being ironed out.
I have a question on that same diagram. Did it account for teleworking? Or is this or were the numbers based pre-teleworking, pre-COVID? Pre-COVID. So it might look a lot different now. Or
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Thanks for taking time for this important issue. This is Matthew Yerkin, for the record, speaking into the microphone from AECOM. Yes, things undoubtedly are different now. In the Sacramento region, I haven't seen really recent data, but I've seen figures that are something like 37% of people are not of office type jobs are in a hybrid situation, something like that nationwide. And SACOG, our regional transportation agency, understands that remote work is a hugely important factor as they look at their regional greenhouse gas passenger vehicle targets for regional transportation planning and the sustainable community strategy. And they've been thinking about this topic a lot and how to get a handle on what is it in 2016, before the pandemic, which is these data that you see on the slide here. What were the patterns in 2020? What are they now? And what dynamic will be true in 2045, where SACOG is going to be trying to aim in the future at reducing VMT? What does remote work look like long term in this region and the national economy more broadly?
thank you, Mr.
Well, kind of along the same lines, and I was something that had come across my mind too, that I have not noticed any noticeable changes, and is in the service of YOLO Bus in the city of West Sacramento over the years. I mean, I remember when I used to take YOLO Bus from South Sacramento to UC Davis my freshman year. And I think the service here is pretty much what it is. It definitely feels like it's been the same since I've lived here for the last 14 years, where it hasn't changed. But I see in the plan that it's actually, the number of stops is lined out in the plan. So is there a rationale or reason why we can't, or trying to work with YOLO Bus to increase services here? And, or is it the fact that the use of VIA has taken the place of some of that usage?
Well, if anything, just nationwide, and especially around here, fixed route bus service is unfortunately shrinking, not growing. It's very expensive, to operate the traditional bus service, especially in the era of, Uber and Lyft and scooters and, and all of that. So I don't anticipate YOLO Bus, as great as they are, substantially expanding like what I call neighborhood level service. They will continue to operate their trunk lines, their main lines, but if anything, it has been shrinking, and the ridership is not there. And I don't know that anybody is super optimistic that will suddenly start to turn around, the other direction. So that's partially why we're here tonight globally, is mobility options are evolving, rapidly, and some of the traditional ways are not there. And, VIAs have only been here for 5 years. Remains to be seen, if it will be a long-term sustainable service or not. So this is why, some of the things that for some of us who live and breathe this stuff keeps us up at night, because these things are evolving, rapidly. And like the whole work from home thing is probably one of the biggest questions facing people like myself and Mr. Gerken and others, because that has a huge implication. Imagine if suddenly the governor orders the state workers downtown to suddenly go back into the office, full time. Can you imagine what the roadways would be like again? But the remote work has trade-offs. A lot of restaurants downtown, for example, depend on that lunch crowd, and they're not getting it from remote work. So this is a fascinating but yet complicated, space, and Mr. Gerken would like to add on to that.
Just to give you another sort of layer of complexity here, I've seen research suggesting that remote work increases VMT in places where there are a lot of office workers and their homes are in suburban locations where they can't not get to school, can't get to coffee, can't get to the 8 out of 10 destinations that aren't the workplace in Roseville, Elk Grove, some other place, VMT goes up because they're not taking transit into the office in downtown Sacramento, for example, and then walking out to lunch or whatever. They're doing their car lifestyle permanently. So that's not even necessarily a savior. In some places, it goes the wrong direction.
But that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that inverse. Any other comments or questions from the commission? Commissioner Squires.
I have a question about, it's the mobility implementation program, table 3.5, item 14-10, pro rata contribution. Who are the people, who are the organizations or the developers or whoever that would need something like this? That it seems like to me they're faced with diminishing the VMT, but instead of doing that, they're able to give money that goes somewhere else and takes care of it somewhere else, and they get off the hook because they have money. I don't know, something about it bothers me. So I just wondered who can you give some examples of how that happens?
So this is acknowledging that VMT is more global, and that transportation programs and projects are really bigger than just one new development. So, for example, down in Southport, where we have a few of these larger developments, and they're not meeting that VMT number, and how can you get them to meet that? And it's really, really challenging. So one option, and this might apply more for a smaller project, is paying a fee that would go into a citywide program to pay for these transportation projects that are more citywide.
Yeah, if the goal, the goal is to reduce emissions, it doesn't really matter, like, when something is literally global, it doesn't really matter if we reduce their emissions, as long as we reduce the emissions. So I think this really is an acknowledgement that this is a global and then thus citywide issue, and thus, we need to look at it more comprehensively. I see it as being somewhat analogous to your overall greenhouse gas inventory, kind of like cap and trade, that type of model where you're looking at it, citywide rather than just within a vacuum of one particular project or location. Because our goal, like, for example, in our climate action plan, we have emission reductions goals, but those are for the whole city. It's not for just, we want to reduce this much in this part of the city or that much in that part of the city. It's all, it all adds up, in that way. So I think this is at least an attempt on our part to recognize and find the balance, because we certainly need more housing as well. And ideally, we would put in housing that would not take us backwards on VMT, but at least at this stage, until such time as some of these greater mobility options can be provided, which, like for example, light rail, no one or two or even three developers combined could provide that on their own, as an example. So we're trying to look at this more broadly, because if you look at a given project in a vacuum, it probably will, VMT could be high, but there may not be very much that they could do about it just within the bounds of the one project. But if we're able to look at this more as a VMT budget citywide, then we might be able to move the needle on this, as long as we're reducing emissions somewhere or somehow in the city.
So has that happened in West Sacramento, where somebody has given money to take care of the problem away from their development? And if so, what did they give the money to? And what is the alternate project that would diminish VMT? Is there an example?
I'm trying to think of one that's concrete that someone has done, and I'm looking at Dirk in here, who works all over the world on things.
Yeah, there are a lot of, I don't think there's not a City of West Sacramento example where a project has come in for entitlements, the city has imposed an in lieu fee for VMT reduction to reduce a significant VMT impact. That has not yet happened. We're kind of laying the groundwork, actually, for that in this very implementation program that you're highlighting here. Example projects could be purchase an electric bus or part of one, install bike lanes or class 1 off-street bicycle trail in a place where there's a gap today that could otherwise, destinations and employment areas could be connected, that sort of thing. It's better to be physical things, you know. You see this sort of approach also in a programmatic way, educate, promote, market a carpool program at a big new employer. That stuff is really difficult to enforce, and what happens when tenants change? And they don't have, those sorts of things don't have as deep of an impact compared to physical things like bicycle facilities, et cetera.
Yeah, I could see some of this potentially helping expand VIA as an example. And I'd like to even, you know, if I had my druthers, I'd want to go even further out of the box by maybe some of these funds help some of our residents maybe, you know, help do their homes more energy efficiently, or get them solar if they might not be able to do it on their own. Things, you know, things like that. It could be a whole menu of options that if as long as we're reducing emissions, I'm personally less concerned about how we need to do it. So I like to think a lot of potential options could be on the table if we can, you know, show where there would be a corresponding, even if we're not reducing the VMT, if we could at least reduce emissions, because that really is what reducing VMT is all about, is reducing emissions. So there could be a whole menu of options, and I'm hoping we can be really outside the box on a lot of those things and hopefully have some multi-benefit provisions in here. I love the idea of helping people, you know, make their homes more energy efficient, and solar, and, you know, and going more all electric, things like that. That's probably hopefully a multi-benefit for the individual as well as the community at whole by the emissions reductions.
I have a question related to the implementation program. It uses shall, like the city shall. So is this enforceable? Who can enforce this, and what if we don't meet a deadline?
Well, it's really up to the city council to implement the general plan, and that's part of what's on their. There's 2020 the strategic priorities. So every year they come up with the priorities for the city for that year. So really, it's up to the city council. If for whatever reason we don't meet a policy or implementation program, there aren't really. It's more, you know, it is aspirational and long term.
We don't get in trouble with any state agency other than housing element. You know, we don't get in trouble, but, you know, this is us trying to set the foundation, you know, going forward. And so we do our best to estimate when these things can happen. We don't always meet every single one of them exactly on time, but this is our objective. And as Seamus said, this is aspirational. We are definitely not, you know, being shy about, you know, some of the things we want and need to do in our community, especially when it comes to climate change, which then is completely interwoven with equity. So we are being bold, and ultimately the city council will tell us if we're being too bold or not. But at least at the staff level for our general plan, we're really trying to set the stage here to continue to improve our community, but also try to tackle some of these big challenges on transportation and also emissions.
And any other questions, comments? I just have one more, if I may. For major arterials, it looks like we took out ideally. So before it said ideally with a physical buffer. And then, so I think Jefferson's a major arterial, right? Sorry. So it says, bicycles should be accommodated by bike lanes at least 6 feet in width with a physical buffer separating from adjacent vehicle traffic. Are there any plans in the works for doing a physical buffer on Jefferson? And I know there's the stone lock thing, but that's like 2035 or something, if there's anything near term.
I'm not aware of anything in the planning stages for Jefferson right now.
There was some work done as part of Washington Realize, not Washington Realize, the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan, because part of the efforts of that goal of that plan was to help kind of bring that neighborhood more together with the State Streets neighborhood and those areas on the west side of Jefferson to hopefully make Jefferson be sort of less of a barrier. That's still a long-term play, but many of those street concepts that were put together kind of in the same vein of what we were looking at earlier with Drever Street did accommodate bikes in that manner much more so. So I still believe those are something we will see, especially when Pioneer Bluff starts to turn over and there's a lot more desire, and when the Broadway Bridge comes in, that area will be, I think, a lot more on the forefront, and we'll be able to make a lot of those kinds of improvements. That's discussed in here, but we are still thinking, long term, hopefully not super long. Hopefully, we all hope these things can happen, sooner rather than later, but there are certain market realities that we do have to accept.
And including that in the general plan provides opportunity when our transportation planning group looks for grant funding, they can point back to that, say that this is the reason for we need the funds to provide.
This really, Jameis is right, this really is the setting the stage for implementation, which will come in a lot of ways, and grants is a big part of it. I think our transportation people, they pull in millions upon millions of dollars a year in grants, and grants are largely how we are able to do some of these more strategic infrastructure investments that we hope will be catalytic for additional private development. So but this gives the foundation for everything going forward, and grants and any other opportunities that may be out there to help fund making some of these things happen.
Thank you.
And if I may follow up on that, since we're on the subject of the circulation diagram and major arterials, etc. I see that there's speed limits listed in here, typically do not exceed, etc. Is this required by law? For example, something defined as a major arterial has to be at least 40 miles per hour?
I'll turn to our consultant Matthew on that.
That is another dynamic area. I sitting here right now, I can't remember if this bill was signed, but there was I think it may have been. Historically, speed limits are set basically based on a speed study, and you find the 85th percentile of how drivers are reacting to the geometries on a roadway, and the speed limit is set basically based on that, not on a normative perspective by a local agency who might want to say, well, that's a little too fast in this location. We want to set a speed limit, and that's a different number. I think there was a bill to allow that flexibility, and I think it was signed so that the city could say, well, now outside of the strictures of state law and the, whatever part of state law required that approach for speed limit setting, we can do what we want. So there is more flexibility on that now. As far as federal funding, there's a federal funding part of this, and some types of federal funding, I think it's gas tax, are restricted to certain types of functional classifications like arterials, the terms that we usually use. And so there sometimes is an advantage of showing more roadways as arterials or as higher level functional classifications in order to be able to have the flexibility to use federal transportation funding to make improvements along those roadways. That's another complicating aspect of this whole scenario. If I might, could I encourage you to turn that into a direction statement instead of a question? Would you want us
Yeah,
to?
sorry. So what I'd like to look at in terms of both traffic calming and the ways that we use these streets and the speeds that we're posting on them. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term slow is smooth, smooth is fast. The idea that we can slow down traffic, make it smoother so that it's moving at a more sustainable speed, which means less hard acceleration, less hard braking, less fuel usage. So even though, Jefferson's a long, wide street, for example, if we can encourage people to drive at a more reasonable pace for, more of their commute, we can reduce emissions, we can reduce fuel consumption, traffic flows at a safer speed, and hopefully fewer traffic incidents as well. So if we're not required to, keep minor arterials between 35 and 45, if we can reduce that further, or we can reduce major arterials to kind of encourage a smoother traffic flow that keeps people moving, overall faster. I'd like to see that.
That's a very good point. We're gonna look into that a little further, and Mr. City Attorney has advised me that the bill that Mr. Gerken was referring to did indeed pass.
Okay.
We have been sort of hamstrung over the years on speeds because of speed trap loss, and you want the posted speed to actually be enforceable.
Mm-hmm.
So we frequently do speed surveys, and sometimes we actually have to raise the speed limit because what people are driving out there in the real world is by and large above and beyond what the posted limit is. So it's I'm hoping that this bill, and I'm not particularly familiar with it, but Mr. City Attorney is diving into it as we speak. I hope that does give us some more flexibility to set speed limits at what you want them to be, not just what people are actually driving at. But the key is it still needs to be enforceable.
Mm-hmm. Understood. And with relation to traffic calming further, is there any do we have a direction with regards to things like raised crosswalks or traffic circles or roundabouts, either replacing traffic lights or, getting rid of some speed bumps and using other less invasive traffic calming measures? Because this is anecdotal, but I did I went down to Southport because I was looking at something else that the Planning Commission was doing. I was on a road that had quite a few roundabouts. It might have been Lake Washington Boulevard, I think. And I noticed my car's trip computer, the gas mileage went up while I was driving around Southport. Get back to Bright, and I suddenly see my gas mileage dropping because, even just at 20 miles an hour, I have to slow down to 10, 15 miles an hour to go over the speed bump and then naturally accelerate again. So again, with regards to smooth driving, being much more efficient, is there anything that the city's going to be, or I would like us to kind of take this into consideration when planning new developments and possibly existing thoroughfares, to make sure that we're doing this as well.
Yeah, so goal 2 and 3 are regarding complete streets and our street system, and there are quite a lot of policies in there about Vision Zero. There's a few of them in there about roundabouts and traffic calming. So if there are any if there's any direction that you have for edits, that'd be great to get that direction.
Yeah, check out policy M3.7. So there are a couple approaches to dealing with cut-through traffic or speeds. One is to interrupt the grid but that just makes it somebody else's problem. Another approach is speed bumps, and which with the effects that you've noted. And then this policy talks about yet another approach, which is visual cues that make a driver realize they need to be careful and slow down in an area. The canyon effect, parking right beside the travel lane, trees that are closer to the vehicular travel lane, things like that just communicate to a driver, I need to be careful and drive more slowly, not because of this speed bump that's coming up and then I can just slam on the gas afterward.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember which street it is, but there's a street in San Mateo that's quite narrow. There's street parking on both sides, essentially one lane in the middle. And the traffic goes through there at a quite reasonable speed because they have to. So yes, I would like to see basically any sort of visual cues or anything that is going to encourage this kind of driving. So.
One of the efforts that the city is undertaking right now is an update to the standard specifications, and that includes roadway design for the entire city. And this is a good example of how this gets translated into what you actually see. These broader policy statements, when we go into updating the standard specifications, that's where you'll see roadway width decreasing. For example, our existing local residential road is a 36-foot width. That is quite a lot larger than what you might see in other cities. So decreasing that to meet these policies to be, more narrow, like you mentioned, it is something that we are working on.
Just related to that, so if commissioners have further technical edits or comments on revisions, can we just send them to you? So yeah, if you have any, you're rereading it and you want to make some of those. And I think we do have one public comment on this. Thank you, Mr. Laffey.
Robin Davis.
Good evening.
Sorry, Robin, can you speak into the mic? I can't.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so tiny homes reduce carbon footprint by using less resources to build and to maintain. They use only 25% of the average traditional home's utility usage, produces 5,578 pounds less CO2 each year compared to the average home, and can lower the greenhouse effect by 36%. I ran here, I'm out of shape, I'm sorry. The market reality is that we need housing and we need to reduce emissions, and a tiny home community would meet all these goals and help us get more grants and funding.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Thank you for running.
Are we allowed to respond to public comment? Was that related to this, or was it kind of?
There's no need to respond, but if you feel like you have a point to add, there's no harm in adding that now.
Okay. Then on that subject, I was going to save this for part 6. Let's see. Are we aware the average square footage of new construction in West Sacramento right now?
I don't have any concrete figures on that. I can tell you we're seeing a much wider variety than we ever used to, from 250 square foot micro apartments to 4,000 square foot single family homes. But there's no doubt overall that homes have been getting larger, not smaller, over the decades. But at least we're seeing a much broader spectrum than we were even like 5 years ago. Micro apartments and similar applications, a lot more ADUs and JADUs than we ever saw before. So there certainly is some movement in that direction at the lower end, the smaller end of the spectrum, I should say, than there has been.
Commissioner Lincoln.
I was just going to say, I'm a realtor, and our two newest developments, I think the smallest is like 1,600 square feet. They are larger than they.
I'd like to say that the homes are getting larger and the family size is getting smaller in America too, so that's happening at the same time. That's kind of a problem. Can I speak to the other stuff? as well?
Yeah, did you have other comments? Yes.
Okay, I wanted to speak in defense of speed bumps since we were putting them down a while ago, and I understand that. But also speed bumps, I think, save lives because not everyone is a conscientious driver, you know, and some people are just jokers when they drive and they speed and they're, you know, and little children get hit. And so speed bumps, unfortunately, they do increase VMTs, I'm sure, but they save lives. So there's a trade-off there that we have to think about. The other question I have is about the Enterprise Bridge. Is there an update on that? Is that being built? Is that in the plans? Because from what I read, that will really reduce VMTs to get that Enterprise Bridge in. Is it a priority? Can we do anything to make it a priority?
Yeah, so the Enterprise Crossing Project, we've applied for what's called a RAISE grant. That's an acronym or something. I don't recall exactly what it says at the federal level. And that is something we certainly are anticipating being awarded to us either this month or next month. And that will allow us to start what's called the PAED phase, which is essentially the preliminary engineering and environmental documentation for that crossing of the channel over there. So there is a lot of momentum behind that plan, and it's complicated because we are talking about crossing a navigable waterway where boats have the right of way, so to speak. So that has to be accommodated, which affect the type of crossing one might do. But there absolutely is a lot of momentum toward that, and if we hear that RAISE grant, that'll really get us kicked off. And I think that's about a $6 million grant that we went for approximately. So not insignificant amount of money. So we will report back on that once we know more, especially once we cross our fingers, we are successful with that RAISE grant.
Any further comments or questions from the commissioners? Seeing none. Mr. Tilley, what are the next steps on this? Is it going to other commissions and then?
We've already went to the Transportation Mobility Infrastructure Commission. Was it last week? They were kind enough to hold a special meeting for us. So we're here tonight. Our next major step is we need to refine some of this some more. We need to put the environmental document out on the street. And then our next step would be to return to you in a more formal hearing where we will be seeking a recommendation on this along with the environmental document. And I think Seamus mentioned that'd probably be about September.
Okay.
Because we do have to circ that document in between, and that's going to probably drive our timing more than anything right now.
Thank you. Turning to administrative function part.
I just had one
sorry.
clarifying question. So sorry, Chair. Mr. Tilley, does that mean that the mobility element document, the clean version we have today, will have the track changes outlining some of the suggested edits that were to openly today?
Yeah, I want to. It's a lot in there, so I really like the track changes to help you kind of zero in on some of those key areas that we've discussed. So for something this long, I like providing a clean version and a red line version, just so as long as that works best for the commission to be able to understand, what was changed. I don't want you to have to go hunting for it and compare what you got tonight with what you're going to get later. We want to make sure that's as easy as possible for you to follow.
Yeah, and one clarification for the track changes, do you want to only show changes from this meeting, or do you want to show all the other track changes that are in there right now?
I can respond on my personal preference, but I'll defer to my colleagues to chime in.
I'm happy to just track any changes from tonight's fresh document.
Same.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest to track from what we saw today and next. Thank you. So Turning to administrative function part 2, any commissioner communications?
Yes, I would like to ask the staff to do their best to provide us with again, just an average square footage of new development in West Sacramento. I think it's a major issue that we're seeing just massive homes being built. And again, it's contributing to sprawl. I understand that maybe that's what the market's supporting right now, but I think the city can do more to encourage kind of a change in the market. And that'll be for another day, but I would appreciate any sort of information on average square footage, because I'm just seeing these massive homes being built that I don't understand the need for. So if we're going to move forward with anything, I would like to see where we're starting at now.
And along those same lines too, if we can get a rooftop count as well. I know in one of the projects that came before us a few weeks ago, there was quite a significant change in the number, or potential change in the number of rooftops that were being planned for that development. And I know there's a few others that are coming down the pipeline as well, particularly in the Southport area. So it would be a thing prudent on our part to be able to have an idea of the number of actual houses that were planned for those areas.
Yeah, we can gather some information and we'll provide it to you, private by email.
Commissioner Squires.
I'd just like to say in that regard, I have really appreciated, Mr. Tilly, the response your department has given when we have questions, the quick response in email, the information we need in Tanya as well. Appreciate that.
Thank you for that. We very much value all the time that you put into this effort, not just here in the meetings, but any prep work that you do, and taking the time to send us any questions is invaluable to us. So I make it a priority that we respond to you as quickly as we possibly can on that. We know you're taking time out of your lives to help us with our work here at the Planning Commission.
Seeing nothing further, meeting is adjourned. And do we have a next meeting?
Our next regularly scheduled meeting would be July 6th, the week of July 4th. So since the City Council is canceling their meeting, which would be on July 5th, I'm inclined to cancel our meeting on July 6th. So we'll formalize that for you in an email communication, but that's, I think, where we're leaning at this point in time.
Okay, thank you.